Hello. In this video, we're going to go over some of Jennifer Saul's Chapter 5, Lying, Misleading, and What is Said. So, in this chapter, Saul goes over some interesting cases and tries to make sense of them based on the framework that she has developed throughout this book. Now, obviously, we didn't go over every element that she developed in the book. In particular, we didn't go over her account of what is said. But we did go over her account of lying and the lying misleading distinction. So we'll try to look at cases that are specific to these elements in her framework. So just to summarize, Saul's definition of lying is the following. A speaker is said to, or a speaker that is not the victim of linguistic error or metaphor, irony, so on and so forth, is said to commit a lie under the conditions that the speaker says a particular proposition, P, they believe P to be false, whether it is false or not, they just believe P to be false, and they take themselves to be in a warranting context, that is, in a context in which the audience members expect the speaker to be saying something truthful. Furthermore, we saw that Saul argues for the distinction between lying and misleading. But unlike traditional proponents of this distinction who maintain that misleading is always morally preferable to lying, Saul argued that there are going to be cases in which lying would be morally worse, or sorry, misleading would be morally worse than lying, and also lying would be morally worse than misleading. So what determines whether or not a particular act of lying or misleading is morally wrong really is going to depend on the reasons perhaps for why the speaker in question, the speaker in question decided to opt to either lie or mislead, which ultimately demonstrates, it reveals something about their moral character. So the moral significance of either lying or misleading depends on what it reveals about the individual's moral character, more so than whether a specific act of lying or a specific act of misleading is morally wrong for its own sake. So the first case we'll look at is the case of the doctrine of mental reservation. So this was a doctrine that was practiced by Jesuit priests during medieval times. So according to this doctrine, sometimes Jesuit priests who were obviously commanded not to lie and would, try to avoid committing an act of lying, would be put in circumstances in which they would have to conceal certain information, perhaps in order to save their own lives or out of a duty of confidentiality of sorts, right? So the way that Jesuit priests would refrain from lying is by uttering a statement that was meant to say something else, like it was meant to express what they were thinking, rather than instead of expressing what they were actually linguistically saying, let's say. So for example, suppose that, during times of persecution, somebody would ask a priest, "Are you a priest?" Right? So the priest would respond by saying, one, "No, I am not a priest." But in saying so, would be thinking to themselves, one star, "No, I am not a priest of Apollo." Right? Now, in such a case, said Jesuit priests would be thinking of themselves as saying not a lie, because their intentions in uttering one were to express the information, "No, I am not a priest of Apollo," because this is what was in their mind when they were uttering the sentence, "I am not a priest." So the question here is there a lie being committed, or is there something truthful being said? Now, under Saul's analysis at first, it seems that we would not, strictly speaking, right off the cuff, be able to say that what the priest says by uttering one is a lie, presumably because it doesn't meet the second condition, namely the priest doesn't take themselves to be saying something false. They take themselves to be saying something true because they are thinking, "No, I am not a priest of Apollo," even though what they're uttering with their mouths is, "I am not a priest." So how do we resolve this problematic case? So Saul's analysis is the following. What the priest is doing is making two simultaneous claims or utterances to two different audiences. Even though there's, one sentence that's being uttered, perhaps, there are two things that are being expressed at the same time. So, what's an example of two different things being expressed with one utterance, let's say? So, for instance, if I say Bob kicked the bucket, I mean there's two different things that I'm expressing. I'm saying that Bob literally kicked the bucket, but I can also mean that Bob passed away, let's just say, right? So I am semantically expressing that Bob kicked the bucket, while perhaps you could say I'm pragmatically implying that Bob passed away because we use the phrase kicking the bucket or kicking the can to mean that somebody passed away. Likewise, Saul wants to say something is similar is going on here, but the information that is being expressed to two different audience members. One audience member is the person asking the question, the persecutor, the earthly audience, and the other one is God, right? Because presumably when the priest says I am not, or thinks I'm not a priest of Apollo, this person has in mind that they are speaking to God, and God would know that what they are saying is true, right? So in this case, when the priest is asked, "Are you a priest?" and the priest responds, "I am not a priest," right? While thinking, "I am not a priest of Apollo," the thought, "I am not a priest of Apollo," is supposed to, in their mind, right, be something that is expressed to God, that audience member. But knowing fully well that what is being semantically expressed by just saying I am not a priest of Apollo is I'm just not a priest. So under that case, Saul wants to say, when the priest states I am not a priest, what they are expressing to their earthly audience is a clear case of a falsehood. What they are expressing to God is a case of something truthful. So the priest has definitely lied to their earthly audience because what they are saying is, "I'm not a priest." They clearly believe that they are a priest, right? And they're in a warranting context in which the persecutor is expecting the truth. And the case in which he's uttering, "I'm not a priest," but thinking, "I'm not a priest of Apollo," in that case, the priest is just saying something truthful, right? Because they believe they're not a priest of Apollo. They are expressing, "I'm not a priest of Apollo," with the same utterance. And their audience, in this case, God, right, would be expecting something truthful. So this is just a kind of weird case in which one individual is making two different claims using the same expression, we could say. The second case that Saul looks at is the case of the Malagasy of Madagascar. And this is a case that is perhaps meant to demonstrate that misleading someone would always be systematically preferable to lying, right? Contra what Saul is trying to prove. How does this case demonstrate that? Well, the Malagasy of Madagascar live in close-knit communities with each other. They also accept the distinction between lying and misleading. Now, given that these are close-knit communities, new information is always going to be rare among the Malagasy. So it appears that sometimes misleading would always be preferable to lying because they would clearly condemn lying systematic or just period. There, any instance of lying would be a moral offense. So in this community, it seems that the following would be appropriate to do. If somebody in the Malagasy community asks another individual, "Where is your mother?" right, and then that individual knows where their mother is. Let's say they know that their mother is in the kitchen. Usually an acceptable response would be to say something like, "She is either in the kitchen or in the garden." Now note here that by saying to the question, "Where is your mother?" right? She's either in the kitchen or in the garden. The individual, knowing that their mother's in the kitchen, is not saying something false, because if it is true that their mother's in the kitchen, then it's also true that their mother is in the kitchen or in the garden, right? It just happens that they are in the kitchen. Now, obviously, they're not divulging this information to the person who is asking where is their mother. So it's not going to be a case of lying, because what they are saying is true, and they take themselves to be saying something that is truthful. So at best, it would be a case of perhaps possible misleading. Now, the objection here, or the concern, is that given that this is appropriate, and it will always be appropriate to utter to the question, where is your mother? Well, under this specific circumstance, and obviously the person who's asking the question, they may not automatically conclude that the mother in question is in the kitchen and not in the garden. They could come to think, oh, they're in the garden. So this could be taken to be a case in which misleading is always going to be systematically more acceptable than lying, and perhaps undermining what Saul was trying to conclude in the chapter where she discusses the distinction between lying and misleading. But Saul thinks that it's a mistake to say that what the person who is uttering sentence 2 is doing is actually misleading. They're not so much misleading as they are being evasive with their response. And so the best way to think of these cases is not that the person is trying to mislead the individual to have them believe that their mother is in the garden by uttering she is either in the kitchen or in the garden. They're just trying to conserve some of this very unique information, right? By saying this. So they're not straight out lying because it's true, right? I think given perhaps the community norms, the person who's asking the question, where is your mother, is going to assume that person who utters she's either in the kitchen or in the garden is saying something truthful. So it's going to be one of those. But they're not actually intending to have them believe that it's either one or the other, right? They're just perhaps, again, just trying to be evasive about the information that they that they're expected to express. So this is just a maneuver of being evasive in terms of divulging information, given the fact that new information in said community is very rare. Thus, according to Saul, it follows that it's not going to be the case necessarily that a mere misleading would also always be morally acceptable over lying, right? Again, according to her framework, it could still be the case here amongst the Malagasy that either lying or misleading would be morally wrong because of something having to do with the individual's character, or perhaps because there is a violation of social norms. So this practice of, say, responding with sentence number 2 when somebody asks, where is your mother, again, would not be a case of either lying or misleading. Definitely not a case of lying, and what Saul's trying to say, it's also not a case of misleading. It's a case of just trying to conceal certain information. Okay, so that concludes this video.